Welcome to Dark Sorcery. I'm Alfredo Martinez, and I have with me once again Gazelam, and I have Hugh Hefner. I mean Guion Hughes. He's in his bathrobe.
Guion Hugh Hefner.
Hugh Hefner, Guion Hughes. I mean, it's Hugh. There's still Hughes, right?
Oh yeah, Guion Hugh Hefner. There you go.
I'm in a underground occult group of Hughes. Hugh Grant, Hugh Hefner, Guion Hughes.
Guion Hughes, man. See some playmates walking around in the background. Now this is Religion and the Occult, episode 6, Pentecost. We're going to be talking about Pentecost, the history of it, and what we see currently in the Christian churches and its relation to occultism throughout the years and throughout history. But yeah, I just want to start out here by saying, let's break down the word Pentecost. So Pentecost, it means 50 or 50th, which symbolizes 50 days after Passover. It's also called, I think, the Festival of Weeks, and it celebrates that. And then there was the barley harvest, and then Pentecost celebrates the coming of the wheat harvest. But yeah, what do you guys have to say about Pentecost?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that for what it relates to as far as like Pentecostal, like Christian churches, for me was beyond the harvest, and that it was more like this was a harvesting of the gifts that Christ gives you. That's how it was related to me in the church, So that's where you get, the gifts of the Spirit, the Holy Spirit, and speaking in tongues, and then even like the darker stuff and it does mention this in the Bible that people can ingest poison without dying. Speak in tongues, like beyond speaking in tongues, and also the serpent wielding, which is like, it says that in the Bible, so it's not just they didn't make that up,
Yeah, it celebrates the giving of the law or the Torah, to Moses and then to the people. But yeah, go ahead, Gazelam.
Goes back. Oh, that's cool. It goes back into the Old Testament and stuff. Yeah. So essentially,
go ahead.
That's why it's considered the apostolic religions, is because it was the apostles were waiting after, Jesus Christ comes back from the dead, and zombie Christ is all teaching the apostles and stuff, and then he climbs on his throne and ascends to heaven, and they have to wait 50 days waiting for some type of sign. And that's what the sign is this manifestation of being mounted by the Holy Spirit, where they're able to talk in tongues and go into convulsions and all this stuff. And they're like, oh yeah, it is all true, because this is finally manifested. So it's like 49 days after Easter. That's right.
Well, okay. Now, when you see the modern day Pentecost going on in some Christian churches, where you see people, it looks like they're having a seizure, they're shaking. Would you say that's kind of like swaying and moving, where your body is moving the stagnant energy inside of you to make room for a higher consciousness? I know a lot of it is fake, but some of it, and in relation to, like we were talking about, like say voodoo or whatever, would you say that's kind of making room for a higher consciousness? What do you guys think?
Well, I think the way
technique, yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, like Guion said, with the technique type of thing, and even how you introduced it, that's how it's introduced in order to manifest upon people. And so essentially it is a form of stage magic, and it's not even very original. It started in the early 1900s and had been around for a long time to be able to get people to be raptured up to the point to where they're mounted by the Holy Spirit. So when you're talking about voodoo and talking about these different things where you're able to get an entire congregation and be able to put on such a show that everybody's lifted up to, so much so that people peek out and go into some type of manifestation that they're wanting people to go into. Yeah, it happens.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, and I think it's very similar to where you see we mentioned voodoo, like how you see when people let voodoo, the Leos possess them, and they act the same way, just convulsing and dancing and stuff, things like that. So I think it's very similar to that. When you see somebody, slain in the spirit or possessed by the spirit in a Pentecostal church, I mean, it's just you're letting a spirit in your body. Spirits, all these other words we have, like angels or saints or gods or devils or whatever, or Leos. I mean, these are just labels that people put on, spirits to try to get their head around it. There could be a spirit that possesses somebody in a Pentecostal church, and it might not be, just like with the John D. He thought he was talking to these pure angels, and then it turns out, the angels are telling him to wife swap and all this
Yeah,
stuff. So,
Yeah.
so there could be spirits that come into you even in a Christian church. If you're allowing
I think
this same technique of allowing yourself to be possessed, they can actually, put your life in different ways. Because
I
we know,
think it,
the church has an ideal of how people should act, and then there's the way that people really act. So it's
so
I think it
there
comes
is.
down to that.
So how in a Pentecostal, because you both grew up Pentecostal, if you're in that type of setting, how does the person putting on the congregation, who is it, the priest, or who's the main
Pastor.
dude?
Yeah.
A
Pastor.
pastor.
Yeah.
So if the pastor's putting this on and people manifest the spirit, which in Pentecostalism is the Holy Spirit, that's the
Yeah.
spirit that's manifesting. How do they discern this person is filling the spirit, or this is a demonic possession, or do
They're
they
really,
put
they're
it
really
all under the umbrella of being the Holy
so
Spirit?
if it happens in a Pentecostal church, they assume no matter what happens that it's the Holy Spirit. Now, I know that a lot of people, like, let's say if the pastor starts doing it or other people in the front row start doing it, other people in the congregation will do it just to copy them or just to be a part of it. Now, whether they're speaking in tongues, whether they're slaying in the spirit, laughing in the spirit, dancing in the spirit, everyone just assumes that because it's in the church, it's all the Holy Spirit. There's no one faking going on. There's no other spirit getting in someone else. The congregation just interprets it all as the Holy Spirit. There's no question. What do you think, Guion?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think they suspend their disbelief in that direction for sure. And then on top of that, I mean, there's a belief in, it's just like casting magic circles. I mean, the church is considered like a sacred ground,
Yeah.
holy ground. So,
Yeah.
so those spirits wouldn't be able to come in and possess you. The thing is, as we all know, though, and this is not just, I'm not even talking about my personal experience, but churches do let in a lot of like there's a lot of a lot of times like they suppress the sexuality, but it still comes out, and like it's people are having affairs and all this kind of stuff. And so
Yeah.
obviously that brings in some more left-hand path type vibes, And so that's where it comes in. But the assumption is it's just like a magician casting a magic circle, like that's protecting them. Only spirits that are like beneficial, or only spirits that he wants will come in, that he's calling, So it's kind of
Yeah.
like the church is set up as like as a magic circle, as a magic protection, and that church is holy ground, and only good spirits will come in. And somebody's being possessed in there, it's got to be a decent spirit. It's got to be a good spirit, something
Well,
Christian
one
and
thing that I've
righteous.
always wondered is that, how in the Bible, when Paul's talking, I think it's 1 Corinthians, when Paul is talking to the church, and he says, yeah, there's different people who have different gifts. And he says, not everyone has the gift of tongues. It's, certain people do, but not everybody does. And he says there's tongues, and then there's the interpretation of tongues.
Mhm.
So I'm thinking, like, these people who are interpreting the tongues, like, are they just bullshitting, or do they really understand what the other person is saying? You know what I mean? Like, I don't understand. I don't know. What do you guys think of is going on in the head of the person who's interpreting?
I mean, I've
I
done
don't
it
know.
before. I think I get it. I get it to a certain degree. It's just it's like a psychic thing. Like if you could read somebody, or you read somebody's thought. It's just kind of like how people try to sell readings all the time. In the occult, right?
Yeah.
It's like you're reading that. you're reading the person, and it's not necessarily that those words mean anything to you, but there have been times when I've been working with people like that, and I found out that they're speaking some things that, like some words in Egyptian or Hebrew or something, which it's a real synchronicity to be like, well, I mean, but what is the likelihood? I mean, any sound we make is likely to match some language somewhere, right? Especially when it's defunct languages where we don't even know how the interpretation is that
I
well,
see. I see.
So,
So I mean,
Well,
go ahead, Gazelam.
Well, I've seen that in ufology and UFO stuff where the aliens had spoke a language and they repeat the language back through under hypnosis, and they're like, "Well, this is really close to the Gaelic language and all of that kind of stuff," But I think if you're in that type of situation where you have three interpreters and one speaker, and that speaker's like babbling, are those three interpreters going to come up with the exact same
Well,
translation to the
every
babble?
every time, and growing up, I saw speaking in tongues every Sunday, and every time I went to church service, and it didn't matter which Pentecostal church I went to, there was always one interpreter. So the person would be upstage, speaking in tongues, and then someone would have a microphone and say, "Thus saith the Lord." But there was never more than one interpreter at a time. Every time I went to church. What about you, Guion?
No, usually it's like people get paired together like that, and if people are trying to interpret tongues and things like that. I mean, it's not always done. A lot of times people just shout out the stuff as it's almost like singing or something. Maybe not even up for general interpretation.
Well, yeah,
That's in my
because
experience. I mean, I think people just let go of the glossolalia. It's a way of like kind of like expressing your subconscious mind without the barriers of your conscious mind. Because I mean, consciously, that's kind of could be a barrier to expressing our subconscious mind, because we're consciously, all of us by nature, just because we're human beings and where how our minds work, we're trying to type these things to like a language that we already know of, or some sound that sounds similar. I mean,
well,
it doesn't have to be
Yeah,
that. I mean,
so
it could be just babbling, but babbling is not necessarily a negative thing. I mean, I think that comes from the whole idea of like, not liking how people chant and stuff like that, or do this glossolalia, and like the whole witch trial mentality of like, well, you're babbling incoherently, you're bringing up, and that's there's some, people might have a subconscious fear like, oh, this person's really hexing me because I don't understand what they're saying, and that's just glossolalia, or it could be some other language, or even Latin or
well,
whatever. So
the,
I mean, it comes
in
from
the
fear too a little bit.
in the book of Acts, chapter 2, when it talks about the whole day of Pentecost, in where they go in the upper room, the Holy Spirit comes, they're speaking in tongues, there's fire on their heads, and where they're at, there's a whole bunch of different cultures and races of people living in the area. There's people from Rome, there's people from I think there were some Arabs in the area. There was all these different races and cultures, and the Bible says that they could all hear their languages being spoken. So it seems like what it's supposed to be is speaking in another language you don't know, but another earthly language to where another race or another culture could say, "Hey, he's speaking my language," but he doesn't know it. But then again, the Bible also says that there are tongues of men and there are tongues of angels. So as far as what it's supposed to be, I'm not so sure if it's, it's supposed to be other people's earthly languages, but is it
well,
also supposed to be angelic language too?
Yeah,
I don't know.
yeah, well, that's the thing with the angelic language. This is unique where in early Mormonism, which happened after the Second Great Awakening, which happened in New York City, which was the burnout district, where a lot of this type of fervor and stuff would happen in congregations. First were seeded and started was in early Mormonism during the Kirtland, Ohio period. There were a lot of Pentecostal type of manifestations where that was one of the key things during the um, opening of the Kirtland Temple, was that they had a big rushing wind of that came into the building, and people started speaking in tongues, and they had the fires above their heads, and I mean it got so crazy where orbs were coming out of the walls, and there were giant
Wow.
giant cruise ships floating above above the temple, and the temple was on fire and stuff. And a lot of people even attribute this to maybe Joseph Smith was mixing drugs in the sacraments and stuff like that. But what's curious about it is that you can get that same type of thing to happen in a congregation by elevating emotion to the point where it's elevated. And that's what in the early Pentecostals, some of the earliest ones with like William J. Seymour, who started the Zuzu congregation in Los Angeles, is you did have this big group of people from, I mean, some of the first people that joined his group, and he was a black preacher, were Armenians, and then all these other Christians were coming in and like, wow, you guys are turning this into a actual thing that happens where people are speaking in tongues, people are manifesting the Spirit. We're actually seeing practical manifestations of these things happening in the Bible that are only supposed to be to the characters in the book, or happen to the high priest, or to the popes and things like that, are the only people there. And this is happening to real people in real congregations and real groups of minorities of different cultures, you know what I mean? And so all of a sudden it's like kaboom.
Well, do you guys think that the Pentecost that we see going on in some modern day Christian churches is the same Pentecostal, like speaking in tongues? Is that the same speaking in tongues that's described in the book of Acts? Because every time I went to church, I never seen fire on top of people's heads. No, there was no Sunday morning when I saw that, no Sunday night, no revival I went to where people had fire on top of their heads. But then Guion brought up a good point where you see similarities in African religions, in African spirituality, where people are shaking like that. They're falling on the floor shaking. They're chanting similarly. I mean, would you say that it's the same? Because and did that modern day Pentecostalism you see going on exist before Christianity?
I mean, I think it's a trend throughout. I mean, it's like something that comes up in naturally for humans, like dancing or singing or something like that. And so, accepting, I mean, and first of all, a lot of this stuff too is like, I wouldn't necessarily say it's fake or stage magic. I mean, but it is like kind of emotional technology or psychological technology. I mean, people can. Like people could build a room up, just by bringing their own energy up, and that's what pastors really do, and that's what I think any kind of like speaker does, is just brings up the stuff. I mean, these things, it doesn't have to even have drugs involved. I mean, I think people just, it's almost like how like a shaman or a trip setter would prepare you for a trip, but it doesn't have to even be drugs. I mean, you could get intoxicated just by the crowd of people if they're all going off like that,
Mm-hmm.
So I think that it's definitely the interpretation of the different things. I wanted to make a point about that, like, and this is maybe kind of a pro tip, like once you get the gift of glossolalia, and like, 'cause, sometimes I'll be at concerts or I'll be dancing, I'll be in the clubs, and I'll just start saying that, and people will be like, "What's that?" And then like when the people, they think it's crazy. So I've trained, like, like my entourage, the girls I go out with and stuff. They're like, "Oh no, he's like a wizard and he's just speaking Enochian, right?" Because who's gonna, it's all Enochian, right? Who's gonna get out a Enochian dictionary and try to like say like you're not speaking Enochian, right? It's a made up language.
Like, well, you didn't say it right. Yeah.
So you just say you're speaking Enochian. I mean, there might be like, like 3% you might run into somebody who'd be like, "Oh, that doesn't sound like the Enochian I've heard," right? But most people haven't even heard it, right?
That's not what we spoke in our house. You didn't say it right.
That's not the Enochian we spoke.
I learned it from the goddess and the DMT elves. It's
or somebody going, I grew up in a bilingual Enochian speaking home, and that's not how it goes. And
Yeah.
That's not what the DMT elves told me.
Yeah.
That's not how my mom spoke it.
Yeah. So a lot of times I'll just, if that a lot of times I think for me personally, once you get the speaking in tongues, I mean, like just like dancing or any kind of elevated energy, sometimes that'll just come out. I think it's just a way that humans express like their subconscious without the limitations of their current language they're learning. 'Cause language is like, that's already you're second guessing yourself if you speak something like we're speaking English, we're already second guessing ourselves. What do these mean? If you're just speaking straight up and you have somebody who's open for those, like other also a spiritual person, they can interpret what you're saying. Not necessarily like they're going over like what's this word, what's that word mean. They're just taking in
Getting
your
the vibe
expressive
off the
consciousness.
Yeah.
And like this is what I get. That's a reading. It's like a reading, like I said before. Yeah.
Well, like some people when they do rituals and they're doing magic, sometimes if they're listening to tribal drumming or something similar, they'll start swaying and moving, and they're it's like they catch the spirit. You know what I mean? So there's kind of that similarity with some modern day occult rituals and catching the Holy Spirit, in church.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
So,
I'd fall into this reverse type audio glossolalia type of stuff where if I hear water trickling or like if I'm pissing or something like that, the sounds will start to communicate like and they start to actually sound like English, or like I'll start to understand it and be like, whoa, it's speaking back to me.
There's I mean, when it comes to sound is very powerful. I mean, sound can change you. I mean, let's say somebody's just sitting down and then they hear a song they like, they get up, they start dancing. Sound can make you get up and do things. But I mean, like when people are in these Pentecostal churches and they have this loud music going on, maybe certain combinations of the music, kind of activates something in them and causes them to just move a certain way or just get up and move.
I think they have hooks. They have hooks, that they know is going to get the crowd like working up.
Certain chords of the music, right?
Yeah. There's actually a good movie that went into this. It was what the Exorcism of Emily Rose or something like. It was like this guy. He actually admitted that he was he was kind of a self-aware preacher guy, and then he was kind of like like not necessarily a fraud, but like he would tell people it doesn't matter what you say when you're up there. It's just the way you say it, And one of the scenes he cut away to in this movie, which I thought was great, is it showed like this whole, it was like a live, like people were there live, and he's like, watch, I'm gonna go out and I'm gonna like talk about my wife's banana bread recipe, right? But the way he said it, he's like, you get the eggs, you get the eggs, you get the flour, you lay the flour down, and then he's so animated, and then he's like, and then you get the banana bread, and everybody's like,
and everybody got excited about it, They started moving.
They didn't know it. They're not even listening to the words. So that's what I'm saying. I mean, it's just the emotion and the way that they're. And then a lot of times they'll have. I don't know if they had this in your church, Alfredo, but they'll have like the organ that goes along, right? Like he'll say, the preacher will say something, and then they'll go ding ding, right? Like they'll do this organ, right? Like as just for effect, and usually they have a full band, and that's I mean, look at the crazy things people do at concerts. Sometimes they're drunk, sometimes they're on drugs, sometimes they're totally sober, right?
Yeah, when you go to a concert, it's kind of a similar thing where you have all these people gathered in a venue, and then you have the band on the stage and they're playing, and people are getting into the music and they're shouting on stage, and people are moving and shaking and just putting their hands up, and it's so similar. You couldn't say that it's that modern day Pentecostalism in some cases is a mock rock concert. What do you guys
Yeah,
think?
for sure, for sure. I mean, and look at if you see any of the old pictures of like when the Beatles or Elvis Presley played like in the 50s, and there wasn't like hard drugs around in the 50s for these teenage girls to be on, right? But I mean, they're like passing out, they're convulsing, they're going crazy when they see Elvis and the Beatles, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, it's the same thing, right? I mean, you've seen
Well,
you know what I'm talking about, right? Where these women like they're fainting,
yeah,
they're
man.
going
So
crazy.
it's like when they're in awe that a celebrity, their favorite celebrity is there, and they're just so amazed they pass out. Well, it's like those people thought, they see Elvis like, oh my God. Well, now in modern day churches, they think, whoa, Jesus Christ is here. Oh my God. They pass out like they really think he's there.
I mean,
Yeah, I mean,
something is.
who wouldn't get upset when you have the power, the spirit of the direct God, I mean, in your presence, a version of it or whatever, who wouldn't get slain, who wouldn't get, who wouldn't change their thing. If you didn't change, you actually were kind of exposing yourself as a non-believer, wouldn't you say?
What do you mean? If what? You expose yourself as a non-believer?
If you didn't, so if people said, the preacher is saying, hey, I'm bringing in the spirit of Christ here, and if people don't react a certain way, if someone's just totally stone faced with a poker face, right? I mean, they're kind of showing they're not a believer, right? I mean, so they might come up to him afterwards and say, hey, you didn't like what was going on, I mean, because I mean, you're not really a believer if you're just sitting there stone faced like this. And everybody else is like going crazy because the pastor saying the spirit of the Lord's here.
I do know what you mean, because it can make the pastor look bad if he puts his hands on you and you don't fall over, or you don't. Because look, I mean, growing up in church, that I had the similar situation where I'd be with my youth group in church, and the youth group would go up to the altar, and then the pastor would like, put his hand on them, like,
and then you're like, why?
And they fall over, or they start speaking in tongues, or they do something. But then when he would come to me, I'd have my hands up, he's like, put your hands up, and he put his hand on me, and I wouldn't do nothing. And like, okay, well, let's try this again, and I wouldn't do nothing. Then they have like 3 or 4 other people put their hands on me. I'm still not going.
You got the devil.
I'm looking around. It's like,
you're definitely a demon.
Normal, So and the pastor is embarrassed. I can see it that, this guy's not going down. What's going on? I just always had like I kind of question. There was something off about it to me, and I really didn't feel this. But and again, the Bible does say that not everyone has the gift of tongues, and I never did speak in tongues growing up. But there was there was the times when there'd be 3, 4, 5 other people with their hands on me trying to get me to go down. I would not go down because I didn't feel the need to. I didn't feel like, I feel fall down. That never happened to me. So I'm looking around at everybody like, I just don't get it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That was me.
I saw a funny video about it that reminds you of that story. It was like a Nigerian preacher, like an African preacher guy right in Africa. And the guy was the same thing like that. His they tripped him.
It's like, if you're not going down, you're going down.
Like, you're not going to make me look bad.
He tried a bunch of times, and then somebody else came, and then one of the guys just put his leg out behind him, and they tripped him.
That's hilarious. So, Alfredo, were you ever reprimanded at all for not going down? Did anybody say, well, it's okay you didn't go down, or was it like,
I mean, I think it's unspoken usually, but it probably,
for Alfredo,
you don't have so much
after
faith,
the pastor would give up on me, like he would, like, okay, they try praying and I wouldn't go down, so then he'd just go to the next guy and then they'd start falling. But then they would the 4 or 5 other people that were praying on me, they'd sit me down, and then they'd be like, they try and talk to me like, okay, how's your walk with God, man? Is everything okay? And then, well, let me pray with you. And then they just pray with me while I'm sitting down, while everyone else is just laid out, and like, it's kind of like they think I needed some extra work or something. Like, I don't know.
Do they attribute that to you have a hardening of your heart?
That's exactly what they would say. Like, you're like, your heart's not open to the Spirit of God. And, and I would do what they said. I would leave it open. It wouldn't happen to me.
It's showing a lack of faith in their eyes, I think. I mean, it's
they would kind of,
somebody's telling you this, telling you the faith, and I mean, part of it's just like getting hypnotized. I mean, most people who get hypnotized on the stage with all that, I mean, I bet you wouldn't fall for that either. I never got that, where they say act like a chicken or whatever, like,
I think
People
maybe
already
it
want
has.
to do that. People already want to do that stuff. They want to get the attention, or they're somewhat open to the hypnotism. It's the same thing with this. It's kind of a form of hypnotism. That's how I look at it. You know.
Maybe it just depends on the person and the way they think, because I know that when I take a look at everybody who I grew up with in church and people who are in my youth group, you know, most everybody who I grew up with in church, you know, is still there. You know what I mean? But me, I started to question it. You know what I mean? I started asking the pastor questions that no one else would ask. I would look around and see everybody falling around. I'm like, you know what? Something seems a little off here. You know, maybe that's why they could never get me to go down, because I you know, I would always like, there's something off about this. It just doesn't seem legit. You know, but I couldn't put my finger on it.
That's why there's a big difference between like mentalism and hypnosis type techniques that are used by all of this stuff. That's why I was talking about at the very first of the of our recording, is that, you know, they're actually mentalist techniques that are old hat really, but they're being performed, and then you have somebody like you and your friends that are dependent on indoctrination on top of it. And so your friends have been indoctrinated from birth, so have you. And then if you're not skeptical about it and see the theatrics that are going all around, you know, you saw it from the beginning. That's why you didn't go down. And everybody's like, oh shit.
That might be why. It just didn't seem completely legit to me, even though I wanted to believe, because I felt like if I didn't believe in it, like I was going to go to hell, or I was going to be possessed or something. And I felt bad. Like if I didn't go down and I didn't, you know, speak in tongues, and I felt like there's something wrong with me, because everyone else is getting the spirit, but not me.
The guilt is a big thing about it. That whole guilt, the whole guilt complex that they put on a person. That's like a big part of the technique as well, you know, to get you locked in.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, there's guilt, and there's also a lot of times there's intimidation that if you continue on down this line, depending on the level of the cultism of the group, you know, if you continue down this line, you know, you're not going to go to a good place after you die. You know, you're going to, you know, go to hell and all that. And so then that comes in too, you know, intimidation of what happens after you die. If you're not a true believer, if you don't really have Christ in your heart, you know, that's the only way. I mean,
we'll see.
You're going to go to, you know, you're going to be at the mercies of Satan, you know.
Well, see, I would especially feel, I really started to question things, like when I would be in Pentecostal services, and let's say the topic of the sermon was giving tithing. Okay. And then let's say I would go to a special church service, and the pastor would be up there, and he'd be like, well, the message tonight is giving. And you know what, if you don't give your money tonight to God, and you don't give this amount, well, God's not going to work miracles in your life, and God's not going to move in your life. And there's people up there just rushing to pull the money out and just throw it up there and throw it in the plate, you know. And I didn't want to give all my money, man. I wanted to go eat at McDonald's or something, you know what I mean? So I'm like, I didn't do it. So then I felt guilty because I didn't give my money, and everybody did, that God was kind of like shunning me, or I'm not going to work any miracles in your life, or you're not going to have as much blessings as other people. And they make everyone feel that in the congregation, if you don't give your money and you don't give a certain amount, that you're like a failure, you know what I mean? And you feel guilty. And I felt guilty, and I'm like, there's something wrong about this. You know, now any normal person who was not raised in a Pentecostal church and was not raised religious, of course, they would see that from the beginning and go, well, this is just a scam. But me, having been indoctrinated since, you know, born and raised in that, you know, I literally felt guilty and felt like a failure and felt like I might go to hell because I didn't give my money, you know.
Well, and even if you didn't have just if you went straight to McDonald's or something, but you were like empathetic and thought, well, why would I give my money to a middleman when I could just go out and help somebody on the street, or a friend, or help someone close to me?
I mean,
yeah, stuff like that. Like, why do I need some middleman or hired guy to give everything?
I started to question when I saw this prosperity gospel going around, where, you know, it's, all about prospering. You give and God gives back, but you have to give, you have to give, you have to give. And you see all these televangelists, and they have private jets, they have mansions, they're wearing Gucci, to church, and you have the congregation who's taking the bus. You know what I mean? It's like, and it's like they're saying, give your money to me while I pray for you.
I've given so much, I have a Rolex.
Yeah. And they're all bragging like, oh, I gave my money back in the day, and look at this costs so much money, and look at my shoes and all this. And now, eventually when I got older, 19, 20 years old, I started to say, you know what, you guys are full of shit. And I'm looking around at no offense to my family that's into that, but I started saying, you guys are buying this? Like, really? And they're like, don't question God, you're letting God down. You're not being open because you're not giving. And I'm like, you guys are so brainwashed. I'm not even going to argue with you guys,
Yeah.
But I love my family who's into that. But growing up, when I got to a certain age, I'm like, you guys are seriously buying into this, and they would just put me down. I'm just like, I'm just not going to argue with you guys anymore.
There's lots of parts in the Bible that talk against that kind of stuff,
Well, yeah.
They say like the money is the root of all evil.
The Bible says money is the root of all evil. And then if you take a look at Jesus,
and then why do churches ask for it so much? If it's
okay. Well, look at Jesus. If you take a look at his life, he didn't hang out with the Pharisees and the top people in the church. He went to the streets. He dressed in these rags. He hung out with the prostitutes. He hung out with all these people in the street, and that's where he spent his time. He didn't spend his time, trying to chop it up with everyone, all the top priests in the church. He went in the streets and talked to all the poor people and all the people who were quote unquote sinners. But then you see these prosperity preachers, and they are not preaching the same message. No.
That's what's funny about like the Jesus turning over the money tables and stuff like that.
The whole reason he did that is because they were turning church into a business, and he didn't like that. And now you see church is now a business.
Oh man! So if you go into a Mormon temple and you have your recommend and everything, the first place you enter is to rent the temple clothes and buy garments and like all the stuff you have to put on to get into the temple. So the first thing you do is there's a credit card machine in order to get, so you can wear the right costume to get inside.
Okay.
Oh wow!
So they get you to buy all that to participate in the service.
That's pretty smart, though.
That's funny.
That's what pyramid schemes are all about, man. Multi-level marketing.
Now, I will say that personally, I think that if somebody, is Christian and that's working for them and they're a better person, let's say, and that works for them, then that's great. I remember I said, the Japanese have a saying that goes, there are many paths to the top of the mountain. Now, back in, I think it was Religion and the Occult episode, I think it was 4, I said something. I said, well, I think people who are religious are of a lesser intelligence, or people who are Christian are lesser intelligence. Now, I'm going to have to retract that statement, because I think that I'm going to have to retract and apologize for that statement, because I think that if it works for them, great. There's nothing wrong with that, okay? There's nothing wrong with them. It doesn't mean that they're of lesser intelligence. They just see things from a different point of view. Occultism works for me. That's different. Okay, but there's nothing wrong with someone who wants to follow Christianity if that works for them. That's great. But I think that you can still be a spiritual person. You could still cast spells. I think that a sincere person who is genuinely in touch with a spirit casting spells in that way, that can work just as good as someone who, is casting spells, similar to how we do. What do you guys think?
I think there's a mount where you need to step back and start to use reasoning and critical thinking, and using techniques like in order to see why you believe the things that you believe. Because you can make a statement, well, religious people are stupid or whatever, but any type of reason to believe in a superstition or into supernatural or in those things, why do you believe those things? Why are you thinking those things? I think it's more important to use critical thinking and reasoning when you start to look into those type of things. It's not that somebody's stupid. A lot of times that comes from indoctrination. All three of us were indoctrinated in really religions that expected a lot from us, like high performance religions. This isn't like cut and dry kind of shit and stuff. So that's why we've been able to liberate ourselves differently, because we're able to look at that stuff and see it for what it is, and that it all came from reasoning and critical thinking and trying to figure out what's happening.
When you're born and raised in a religion, it's very hard to disconnect and unplug from that and see things from a different point of view. It takes years to, kind of restructure your mind and kind of make up your own mind on things, because a lot of times these churches just want you to believe how they believe and how you were raised to believe, and there's no other way. Like, there's a lot of like take for instance, I was raised in the Assemblies of God Pentecostal church. Okay, well, a lot of people in the church are like, these other branches of Christianity, they're not really following God, or the Baptists, they're not following God, or the Catholics, like they're not of God. We're the only true church. And I think that's very ignorant. You need to have an open mind and like, okay, other people can have their own spirituality and achieve good things. It doesn't necessarily have to be in a box, so. Well,
and that's the one true Scotsman fallacy. So it's like, I'm the only one true Scotsman, and it's a pretty common fallacy.
It's the same thing as occultism. Like you can say like there's certain, whether you're a Thelemite or a Satanist, or whether whatever kind of magic you practice, you say, well, my magic is only the right magic, and that's not the way you do divination, or that's not the way you do a spell. Like, everyone has their own magic. A spell is not going to work the same for everybody. That's why it's so important for everyone to find their own magic and find what works for them, find their own system. Same thing with, religious people or their spirituality. They have to find their own system, what works for them.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point is if people are going always around like you could call it right, for right hand path and left hand path. So people are always going right, they're still going around in a circle. If they're always going left, they're always going around in a circle. I think the awareness you're talking about, Gazelam, like is the awareness to actually know when to go right, when to go left, and and think about your own things, instead of getting caught up in dogma. And that's a big thing with the chaos magic is avoidance of dogma, because like we're saying, that's indoctrination basically, and I don't know if people that are religious, like a lot of, I mean, there is a movement, on the right and Christianity to like not like universities and certain studies and stuff. But I mean, you see that on both sides to a certain degree. But there is a thing about like being a conservative and being on the right, right wing, and being Christian, where they don't necessarily want, look up to like somebody who has a Harvard degree so much, and stuff like that, and they do things more simpler terms, which I've told some jokes in the past. Some of the things they say it's just ridiculous, right? It does make people look dumb, like the time of that the pastor. I think I mentioned this joke before, right? Where the congregation was fighting against a bilingual thing, right, in Texas or something, right? And the pastor was saying, well, if English is good enough for Jesus, it's good enough for me, right?
Yeah, there was some of that. I mean, I grew up in the Latin district of the Assembly of God. Where I grew up in bilingual churches, and some of those people, man. If let's say if there's a congregation of Hispanic people in my church, and then there's a white church who's Pentecostal, and they like what the songs we're singing, and then they're like, well, can you interpret that? I remember back in the day, some of those churches did not want to interpret it for them.
They're like, we're a Paisa church, man.
Yeah, it's like So, but I think that's an issue with pride. It's too prideful. It's like just let them, man. It's like
I think better would just to interpret it like to troll them and mess with them a little bit, like, this really is it.
Well, I think people just got too prideful of their culture. Like, I mean, in the church I grew up in, there was people from Mexico, Puerto Rico, Chile, Venezuela, Guatemala. That's what people that was in my church. And the cultures are so different from a white church. You know what I mean? I think sometimes the Spanish churches just get a little too prideful, and they don't want to interact with these other cultures, and they need to. You know what I mean? That's being closed-minded, and especially let's take it into the occult. You know what I mean?
I mean, I don't. There's so much of an issue with colonization and stuff, though, that I can see why
I will say
something that would be a Latino church would be like, we don't want any fucking white people in here.
Okay.
Like, doing this
I will say
stuff,
this.
you know?
I will say this. There is some racism that, okay, like take for instance, you know, I experienced racism growing up, you know, from white people. I will say that, you know, I remember, you know, me and my sister, you know, some white people used to call us spics, and there was sometimes if you're a Hispanic and you walk into a white church, sometimes you don't feel welcome. You know, I've seen that firsthand. You know what I mean? And so I think that maybe some of those people, if they were mistreated in a white church before, and then they see white people coming to them saying, well, we want some of what you guys do, maybe that has to do with why they're kind of a little standoffish, and because, you know, maybe because of the racism. I don't know. But all I know is that I did experience some racism, you know.
That is
and I will say that, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that's one thing that is really a key thing with the earliest Pentecostalism in the early 1900s is that it was all about mixed congregations, and that's where everything like exploded. Was for the first time there was like a multicultural group coming in, and then having these things manifest with the Spirit, and it went global, which is just really, really incredible, especially being such a new religion. I mean, we're talking like early 1900s American religion manifesting and exploding like that. It's just really incredible, like, because today, like with the neo charismatic movement that's going on, I mean, it's almost terrifying how now it actually even hijacked America to become this Christian nationalist bullshit that's going on, where they're, you know, really it's a bunch of fucking Nazis wanting to take over the United States, and that's what's happening. And with the Pentecostals and with all these evangelical religions coming together, is they want a theocracy in the United States. And you and I and warlocks, witches, atheists, we're all fucked in this kind of situation because they're really, really wanting to take over the fucking world and think it's their whole right to do so.
I do know that, I know that I want to say, first of all, that this channel is nonpartisan. You know, we don't like to get political, but I will say that the incoming administration, it does kind of look, you know, maybe look down on people like us and what we believe and what we practice. And it might be
Christian
kind of
nationalism. You don't have to be partisan to be against Christian nationalism. Christian nationalism wants control of this country. And so are you picking a side? I'm nonpartisan. I've always been nonpartisan.
I'm nonpartisan. I don't like to get into politics, you know. But I'm just saying
not a Democrat or a Republican or any of that shit. I'm a fucking anarchist, and I'm saying you better be fucking worried about the Christian nationalists right now.
Yeah. Well, on a back to Pentecost, I will say that there is some power to it, because I might have told this story before in another video, where I remember back in like the year 2000, I had a lot of hatred in me because of the racism that I experienced. And I went to a white church, and there was a white evangelist there that I had met a few years before that. And he goes, you have a demon in you. And I'm just sitting in my seat, and everyone's up there. He goes, you have a demon in you. He says, come up here. And I came up on the stage. And he goes, put your hands up. And I put my hands up like this. He goes, forward like that. And I put my hands up forward like that. And he goes, now everybody put your hand towards him and start praying. And then he started putting his hand towards me. He started going, sha la 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 la. He started speaking in tongues. And I swear to God, I felt something inside me go, and it shot right. This energy just shot right out of my arms. I felt something shoot outside of me, physically shoot out of me. And I felt kind of like winded, like, whoa. and I didn't have any hatred in me, and I wasn't racist towards white people anymore. You know what I mean? So that did cure me of my racism. But, you know, if there is, people can say, oh, you know, that's just a joke. And a lot of it is not something to be taken serious. Sometimes a lot of it is just fake and people copying other people. But there is a small segment that it is legit and does have some power. You know, now whether that has to do with, you know, any culture can, you know, with focus and intent and enough energy being built up, they have their own way of practicing, you know, working energy. But some of it can be legit. What do you guys think?
I think that's awesome. I think in my interpretation of what happened there is you were given permission not to have to keep going with that type of hate. And for the first time, you were actually lifted out of that, you know?
Yeah, since then, I mean, you know, it didn't matter if, you know, I like all cultures now, all people. I don't have that racism that I experienced growing up. Some of it, I mean, I still had some white friends growing up, you know, and would play with in the neighborhood and stuff like that. But well, that type of racism from certain people that I experienced allowed me to hate white people, you know what I mean? And I don't. I like all cultures now. You know, I have lots of white friends, you know, and you guys are my friends, you know what I mean? So, but yeah, it did. It amazed me that I had kind of questioned it, but I know that there is some legitimacy to it. But then again, I don't think it necessarily has to do with Christianity itself. I think no matter what culture or religion, if they follow a certain set line of principles and they are in touch with a spirit, doesn't necessarily have to be the Holy Spirit, but a spirit, they can do certain healings on people. And it's just a normal part of humanity before organized religion came into being.
I mean, if you look at it, it's like if you believe in psychic things and magic and occultism to a certain, you know, whatever techniques you use, I mean, why would that really necessarily change? I mean, from a chaos magic perspective, at least, why would that change if you just change your religion? Or so why wouldn't that work in a Pentecostal church any more than it would work in a satanic temple or in your own
gathering of witches
where you're
coming
doing
together,
your own
right?
stuff? I mean, if that stuff works, it just works. It doesn't. All this other stuff is really, you know, that's really going back to which this whole thing is based on. This, you know, is really kind of cultism, and even I think racism and ethnocentric and all that is all cultism too. I mean, there's people get a certain way, a certain idea of how things should be in a certain area, and they don't, you know, and that's it. And then it goes down to like from you know, even political to religion. And then, you know, it'll go all the way down to things like, you know, like we're seeing, you know, there's a lot. It does seem like there's a big difference to my experience from like how the spirit feels depending on what church you go to, you know? Mm-hmm. I mean, it reminds me of this, they had this show called American Gods. I don't know if you ever seen it or heard of the book.
I never seen it. No.
American Gods. And in this show, they actually had like different Jesuses, right? So they had like white Jesus and Mexican Jesus, and they were like these real gods that are manifesting. And so Mexican Jesus is like helping people, you know, like going across the border and stuff, and trying to, and then like white Jesus is over there like praying for the border patrol and, you know, helping them out with their guns and stuff. And all that. So it's just like a total. I mean, like the nationalist thing you're talking about. I mean, that is their interpretation of Jesus. You know, that I mean,
Neil Gaiman is great that way. Like in that whole show is that the old gods are dying because people don't believe in them anymore, and so the new gods that are coming about are like technology and art, and these gods are killing the old gods.
To me, that's no different than, you know, ancient cultures around the world having a god depending on what their needs were. Like, this is the god of crops because we need crops. This is the god of rain.
Yeah.
You know, this is the god of, you know, whatever, you know, depending on what your need is. So yeah, of course, you know, Mexican Jesus is going to help people cross the border. And then, you know, white Jesus is going to help people, I don't know, make bologna sandwiches. I don't know.
Better biceps.
So
yeah.
yeah,
You should try to watch that show though. It's pretty interesting. Yeah, you know, like they have like I mean they didn't go in. That wasn't the main thing. They have like other gods and stuff too. It's really complex. But that was just like one scene, and it was showing how that there's different kinds of Jesus. You know, I mean Jesus is going to be the same way as in Greece as he is like in over here in Compton. You know, I mean it's really not. I mean
Yeah,
it
on
does.
the
could be
There
a
are
completely
movements.
different Jesus. Yeah.
There are movements that do like and that's the beauty of that's the light side or the positive side of cultism, right? There are revivals and stuff like you were talking about Azusa Street. We're bringing together different cultures, different races, different ethnicities, and they really believe in just like one thing, which is which is Christ at the time, right? Which is Jesus, and that's their whole
Holy
revival.
Spirit.
They
Yeah.
forget, they let all those other things go. But then once it takes its full thing, then it could go all the way on the other side of the cultism thing is, well, everybody else is not doing it right, everybody else, and that could be, just a matter of them, they want them to change and do things the right way. I mean, but this stuff devolved into like, the witch trials and the Inquisition. People thought they were actually trying to show people the right way, the same way a surgeon would like cut out your appendix to help you. They were like torturing people in the witch trials to like show them, hey, whatever you're doing is wrong. You're going to go to hell. We don't want you to go to hell. So we hate doing this, but we're going to have to torture you to get these demons and stuff out of you. And
Well,
that's how they thought
that's
of
what
it.
I'm saying. Oh, is that these are the same people in the '80s that were behind the Satanic Panic and stuff. So you think that the '80s were scary and shit with this stuff? Like it's coming to a head with the Christian
No, there's
nationalist
definitely a
stuff.
new satanic panic. I can sense that for sure. A new satanic
I
panic
mean,
for sure.
that's who these evangelicals and Pentecostals and people are. They don't have room for you. It's Yahweh or the highway, man.
Yeah, it's pretty clear cut. But yeah, it looks like that's about all the points that I wanted to touch on in the video. Anything you guys want to say before we call it a day?
No,
Oh,
I don't
I
think
know I
anything.
have a lot to talk about, but there's no way we could fit it all in, I don't think.
We'll fit it in the next video. But yeah, guys, thanks for your time and coming on. It's always fun having a conversation. And everyone, check out all their social media links below in the video description. I'll have all that with Gazelam and Guion. And everyone who's watching, like and subscribe to Dark Sorcery.
Double GA.